The year was 1867, and the plains east of the Rockies lay quiet beneath a sky bruised purple with the last of a fading storm. Lightning still flickered far away, but here the rain had thinned to a whisper, the land damp and smelling of sage and earth. Clara Thompson stood on her porch, shawl tight about her shoulders, watching the dark horizon with wary eyes. Out here, every change in the wind carried weight, storms, strangers, even war. She had learned that lesson too many times to ignore. The lamp beside her door guttered as the breeze strengthened, pushing damp air through the cracks of her small cabin. She turned back inside where her son, Samuel, lay curled on a cot, his hair damp from the heat that clung after rain. 8 years old, restless even in sleep. He stirred, murmured something about his father. Clara bent to smooth his brow with rough fingers, though the memory of her husband's face brought a pang sharp enough to bite her breath. 3 years gone since the fever carried him off, leaving only debts, a patch of struggling land, and Samuel's wide eyes fixed on her for every answer she did not have. The frontier was a place that tested every seam of a person. Men boasted of what they tamed, the soil, the rivers, the herds, but Clara knew truth lived in silence, in nights like these when you listened to the distance and prayed nothing came riding out of it. She banked the fire, turning toward her bed, when she heard it, faint, almost swallowed by the hiss of rain. A cry. Her hand froze on the quilt. She held her breath. Nothing but wind. She told herself she imagined it some trick of tiredness. Then it came again, thin, high, broken, a sound not of coyote or bird. A human voice. Clara reached for the rifle propped against the door. The metal was cold beneath her palm, though her hands had grown too used to its weight these past years. She opened the door slow, careful, and stepped onto the porch again. The night was black except for silver streaks where the moon fought through clouds. The sound drifted from the riverbank, no more than 100 yards off, a ragged wail, carried weak on the wind. Her first thought was trap. Men whispered of raids, of decoys set to draw settlers from safety. She had heard stories, families cut down after opening doors to a cry in the dark. Fear bit deep, urging her to step back inside, bar the latch, keep her boy safe. But the cry came again, weaker now, and something in it clawed her chest. It was the sound of someone young, someone in pain. "Lord help me," she muttered. She lit the lantern, cradled the rifle in the other hand, and crossed the yard. Mud sucked at her boots as she hurried down the slope toward the river. Branches slapped, wet against her skirts. The smell of willow and damp soil rose heavy. She found the girl half hidden in reeds, collapsed near the water's edge. No more than 14, maybe younger. Long black hair, matted with rain and blood. The left leg twisted under her, soaked dark. Her chest heaved shallow, each breath a struggle. A flash of pale skin beneath torn buckskin showed where a bullet had ripped through. Clara froze, breath caught sharp in her throat. A native child. Fear and pity crashed together inside her. This was dangerous, more dangerous than she had dared imagine. Every settler within 20 miles would call her enemy for even standing here. And if the girl's people came looking, God only knew what they might think. The girl's eyes fluttered open, dark, glazed with pain, but clear enough to fix on Clara. Her lips moved, shaping a word Clara couldn't catch. Then she coughed, shuddering, and went limp. Clara knelt despite herself, pressing fingers to the girl's throat. A pulse, faint but steady. Her gaze swept the trees, expecting riders, ambush, anything. Only the sound of the river and the groan of branches in the wind. She could leave the girl. Walk away. Pretend she never heard. No one would know. But she would. Samuel would. And maybe she thought God would too. She shoved the rifle strap across her shoulder, slid arms under the girl, and lifted. The weight nearly buckled her knees. Dead weight, heavy with water and blood. She gritted teeth and climbed the bank slow, lantern swinging, each step a grunt of effort. Her skirts dragged, soaked. Her heart hammered louder than the storm's dying rumble. By the time she staggered through her own doorway, her arms shook with strain. Samuel sat up, blinking sleep from his eyes. "Mama," he whispered, voice small. "Who's that?" "Go back to bed," she snapped, harsher than she meant. She carried the girl to the spare cot near the fire and laid her down. Blood stained the blanket at once, seeping in dark circles. Samuel climbed from his bed, peering with wide eyes. "She's an Indian." Clara rounded on him, finger raised. "Not a word, Samuel. Do you hear me? Not to anyone." He nodded quick, but his gaze stayed fixed on the girl, fear and curiosity warring across his face. Clara knelt, tearing open her box of bandages and herbs. Supplies were low, too low, but she worked fast, stripping away wet buckskin to reveal the wound. The bullet had gone clean through the thigh, high above the knee. Jagged flesh, edges swollen and angry. The girl moaned when Clara pressed cloth against it, body tensing. Clara whispered soft nonsense, words she had once spoken to her own daughter before the fever took her. She boiled water, cleaned the wound as best she could, stitched clumsy but steady with shaking hands. The air filled with smell of blood and hot iron, sharp enough to sting the throat. Samuel crouched nearby, hugging his knees. "They'll come for her, won't they?" he asked at last. "Her people." Clara tied the last knot, wiped sweat from her brow. "Maybe, maybe not. What if they're angry?" She looked at him then, her son, with his father's eyes, too young for such questions. "Then we trust the Lord, and we keep quiet. Do you understand?" He swallowed hard but nodded. Hours dragged. The storm passed, leaving only dripping eaves and the soft crack of the fire. The girl drifted in and out, whispering words in a tongue Clara did not know. Once she caught something like water. Clara tipped a cup to her lips, steadying her head as she drank. Near dawn, the girl stirred more strongly. Her gaze found Clara, held it. She whispered in halting English, "Ayoka." Her voice was hoarse, a single name offered like a gift. "Rest now, Ayoka," Clara said, but the girl shook her head faintly, eyes fluttering closed again. Clara sat back, exhaustion weighing heavy. Every sound outside set her nerves on edge, the call of an owl, the crack of a branch. She kept the rifle close, though she prayed it would never be needed. As first light bled across the horizon, Clara rose to tend the fire. She stepped to the window, pushing the curtain aside. Smoke lifted from the north, dark against the pale sky. Too much for a cooking fire. It rose in a thick column, black, churning. Another homestead, burning. Clara's breath caught. She thought of her neighbors, the ones who had warned her never to trust the tribes. She thought of Ayoka bleeding on her cot. She thought of Samuel asleep in the corner, clutching his blanket like a shield. Her choice had been made. Whatever came now, there was no turning back. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, whispering words she hadn't spoken in years. "Lord, give me strength." Behind her, the girl shifted, murmuring something soft. Clara turned and watched her chest rise, shallow but steady. One fragile life, plucked from the riverbank, now tied to her own. She could not know that in saving the girl, she had lit a fuse across the prairie. She could not know that before the next sunrise, 30 painted riders would come thundering to her door. But some part of her, deep in her bones, already sensed it. The morning broke clear, but brittle, the kind of dawn where every sound seemed sharper, every shadow longer. Clara moved through her cabin in silence, the weight of the night pressing her shoulders. The girl, Ayoka, still lay on the cot, her face pale, in the weak light. The fever hadn't taken her, not yet, but her body trembled with each shallow breath. Clara kept her hands busy, boiling more water, steeping willow bark tea, grinding the last of her herbs into paste. Action held the fear at bay. Samuel sat at the table, eyes heavy, a piece of cornbread untouched before him. He kept glancing at the girl, then at his mother, then at the window. His voice, when it came, was thin. "What if someone comes, Mama?" Clara forced a steady tone. "Then we say nothing. She's hurt and no one needs to know. Eat your bread." But he didn't eat, only picked at the crust. His silence carried the weight of questions he couldn't put into words, questions Clara herself couldn't answer. By mid-morning, Clara slipped outside with the wash basin, needing the air, though her nerves stayed taut as wire. The yard stretched wide, fenced with split rails that had seen better days. Beyond, the prairie rolled flat and endless, dust already rising as the sun began its climb. She scanned the distance for riders, for smoke, for anything that might spell trouble. All seemed calm, but calm on the frontier was like the surface of a river, peaceful above, hiding currents below. She had just poured water into the trough when hooves pounded up the lane. Two riders, neighbors from half a mile north, Ezekiel Porter and his brother Thomas. Hard men, lean from years of dust and labor, rifles slung casual but ready. Clara set the basin down, dried her hands on her apron, and forced a smile. "Mornin', Miss Thompson," Ezekiel called, reining in. His voice carried that easy drawl she had never trusted. "You seen anything strange last night?" Clara's heart gave a jolt, but she held herself steady. "Strange." Thomas spat into the dirt. "Tracks, hoofprints. Looked like Indians. Passed close to your place." She felt heat crawl up her neck. "I was inside. The storm kept me busy enough patching leaks." The men exchanged a glance. Ezekiel leaned forward in his saddle. "Well, you be careful. Heard talk of raids. Family burned out near the river. Some say the tribes are bold again, stealing cattle, stalking women. Best keep your rifle close." "I always do," Clara said, voice firm. Ezekiel's gaze swept her yard. Her cabin lingered too long. She felt it like a hand pressing on her chest. Then he tipped his hat, though the smile never touched his eyes. "You let us know if you see something. Wouldn't want trouble sneaking up on a widow and her boy." The brothers turned and rode off, dust rising behind them. Clara waited until they disappeared before letting her breath spill out. Her palms were damp. She hurried back inside, pulse racing. Samuel stood just beyond the door, eyes wide. They knew Mama. They knew she was here. Clara gripped his shoulders. "No, they suspect. That's all. And that means we need to be more careful. You understand?" He nodded, though his lip trembled. Clara kissed his brow, more for her own steadiness than his. Then she turned to the cot. Ayoka's eyes were half open, watching. Clara couldn't tell how much the girl understood, but there was awareness there, and something more, a quiet strength beneath the pain. Over the next days, Clara kept the girl hidden as best she could. When neighbors passed on the road, she shuttered the windows. She tended chores quickly, avoiding talk in town. Word carried faster than dust here, and whispers of raids grew louder. Someone's cattle gone missing. Another homestead's chicken coop stripped. Always the blame fell on tribes. Clara heard muttered vows of vengeance in the store, the blacksmith's yard, even at church. At home, Samuel grew restless. He lingered near Ayoka, fascinated, afraid, full of questions he couldn't stop asking. Does she have family? Will they come for her? What if the men find out? What will they do to us? Clara hushed him each time, though the same questions gnawed her own mind raw. Slowly, painfully, Ayoka began to heal. Fever eased. Her leg knit, though movement came hard. One evening, as the sky flamed with sunset, she whispered words clear enough for Clara to grasp. "Thank you." Clara's chest tightened. She nodded once, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Samuel grinned shy, as though the small words were a miracle. In the quiet of those days, something shifted. Clara saw in Ayoka not just a wounded child, but a mirror of her own lost daughter. The way she clenched teeth against pain, the fragile strength in her gaze, it tore open places Clara had locked away. She found herself smoothing the girl's hair, murmuring gentle words, almost forgetting the danger crouched outside their door. But danger did not forget them. On the fourth night, Clara went into town for salt and kerosene, leaving Samuel's strict orders not to open the door. At the general store, men gathered in low clusters, voices sharp. She caught pieces of their talk, settlers planning a raid on a nearby encampment at dawn, armed to teach savages a lesson. One man spat into the dirt, swearing he'd take scalps for every cow lost. Clara felt her stomach turn to stone. She bought her supplies quick and slipped away. Head down, though she caught Ezekiel Porter's gaze following her from the porch. He leaned to another man, whispering, The sound of laughter chased her all the way to her wagon. By the time she rattled back into her yard, dusk pressed heavy, the horizon bruised deep red. Samuel ran to meet her, relief plain. "You were gone so long." Clara ruffled his hair, trying to steady her voice. "I'm here now." But inside her thoughts raced. The settlers meant to strike. And Ayoka's people, were they the ones marked for slaughter? That night, she sat by the fire, hands wrapped around a cup of weak coffee, staring at the flames. The girl dozed nearby, Samuel tucked under blankets. Clara's chest felt like iron bands. She could send Ayoka away, perhaps save her household. Yet to push her out now, wounded and weak, was to sign her death warrant. To keep her was to risk everything, neighbors' wrath, perhaps even war. The choice cut deep as any knife. She rose, paced to the window, pushed the curtain aside. The prairie lay silver in moonlight, silent but for the whisper of grass. Still, she swore she felt eyes in the dark, watching. Toward dawn, the sound came, low, rhythmic, distant. A drumbeat, soft at first, then stronger, pulsing through the ground, through her chest. She stiffened, breath quick. She opened the door to the porch. The first colors of sunrise bled into the sky, painting clouds gold and rose. On the horizon, shapes moved. Riders, dozens of them, lined against the morning light, horses tossing heads, feathers catching fire in the sun's glow. Clara's breath locked in her lungs. 30, maybe more, sweeping across the plain toward her cabin in silence save for the beat that echoed like a heartbeat in the earth. Samuel stumbled out behind her, rubbing eyes. His face went pale as milk. "Mama." "Inside," she hissed, pushing him back. Her own heart thundered. The riders drew closer, their pace measured, neither rush nor retreat. Painted faces, rifles slung, bodies straight in the saddle. The earth trembled under their hooves. Clara gripped the doorframe, her other hand reaching for the rifle propped nearby, though she knew it would mean nothing against so many. Behind her, Ayoka stirred, voice weak but urgent. She called out words Clara couldn't understand, lifting a hand toward the sound of the riders. Clara's mind reeled. This was the cost of her choice, the weight of mercy. She had brought the storm to her own doorstep. As the first warriors reached the fence line, horses stamping, eyes dark and unblinking, Clara stood frozen on her porch, son at her side, the girl calling faintly behind her. And in that moment, one truth carved itself into her bones. Help one child, and sometimes the whole world comes riding to your door. The thunder of hooves shook the ground as the riders fanned out across Clara's yard, 30 strong, their painted faces gleaming in the new sun. Dust rose in pale clouds, hanging in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Samuel clutched Clara's skirts, trembling. She drew him close, her other hand hovering near the rifle, though she knew it was no shield against so many. The riders halted in a half circle, silent but for the huff of horses, the creak of leather. A tall man at their center dismounted, his hair bound in braids threaded with red cloth, his chest bare save for paint and beads. His eyes swept the cabin, the yard, then fixed on Clara with a gaze steady as stone. Behind Clara, Ayoka called weakly, her voice breaking, but the words carried. The warriors stirred, heads lifting, eyes seeking. Clara stepped aside, though every instinct screamed to guard her door. Ayoka struggled into view, leaning against the frame, one hand braced on the wall. Her face was drawn with pain, but her eyes shone bright. The chief's hard expression shifted. He strode forward, his men parting for him. He reached the porch, knelt before Ayoka, and touched her hand with reverence. Words passed between them, fast and low, a current of relief and fury intertwined. Then he rose, turning his gaze back on Clara. She stood stiff, Samuel pressed against her side, heart hammering so loud she feared he'd hear. The chief spoke, his English rough but clear enough. "You saved her." Clara nodded once, her throat dry. "You are brave. Or foolish. Maybe both," she managed, voice hoarse. A flicker of respect passed his face. He gestured sharply, and 2 warriors dismounted, pulling bundles from their saddles. They carried furs, carved wood, smoked meat, gifts laid carefully at Clara's feet. The chief's voice was solemn. "For kindness, our debt." Clara stared at the offerings, unable to answer. The weight of what she'd done pressed heavier now, not lighter. Gratitude, this vast, was dangerous. It could draw eyes sharper than hatred, and eyes were already watching. From the road came the rumble of hooves, the metallic clink of rifles. Clara spun, dread slicing her chest. A knot of settlers rode hard into the yard, Ezekiel Porter at their head, Thomas beside him, and a dozen more from the valley. Their faces were tight, hands on triggers, fury bright in their eyes. The air turned brittle as glass. Ezekiel reined in, rifle raised. His voice cracked across the space. "Step away from her, Clara. Now." Clara felt Samuel flinch against her side. She lifted a hand, forcing calm into her voice. "Put your guns down. No one needs to die here." Ezekiel barked a laugh. "No one but them. You think we'll let savages gather at our doorstep? You've brought them here, woman. You've betrayed us all." The words cut sharp, yet Clara held her ground. "I saved the child. That's all." The settlers muttered, rifles shifting. The warriors stiffened, hands falling to tomahawks, to rifles of their own. Horses stamped, nostrils flaring. Every breath of the prairie seemed to hold still, waiting for the crack of the first shot. The chief stepped forward, eyes locked on Ezekiel. "We come not for war. We come for thanks." His voice was steady, carrying across the tension like a blade. Ezekiel sneered. "Your thanks don't mean a damn thing to us. You've stolen stock, burned homes. We're here to finish what you started." Clara's voice broke through, sharp as a whip. "Ezekiel Porter, you will not spill blood on my land." His eyes snapped to her, cold and burning. "You'd stand with them?" Her hands shook, but she stepped down from the porch, placing herself between the two lines of guns. Samuel cried out, but she didn't falter. "I'll stand where God tells me, and he tells me this child's life is worth more than your hate." The settlers murmured, uneasy, but Ezekiel's face only hardened. He raised his rifle, finger brushing the trigger. "Then you'll fall with her." Time slowed, each heartbeat loud in Clara's ears. She saw Samuel on the porch, white-faced, eyes wide with terror. She saw Ayoka behind him, frail but fierce, gripping the doorframe as though she'd throw herself between them if she could. And she saw the line of men before her, her own people, blinded by fear. She spread her arms wide. "Then fire. Shoot a woman dead for saving a child. Go on. Let the whole valley see what justice you carry." The silence that followed was thick as molasses. Ezekiel's jaw clenched. His rifle stayed high, but his men shifted uneasily. Thomas muttered low, "Zeke, maybe we ought." "Shut your mouth," Ezekiel snapped. But doubt had cracked the surface. The settlers glanced at one another, at Clara standing bare-breasted to their hate, at the warriors watching with weapons ready but lowered. No one wanted to be the man who pulled the first trigger against a woman whose only crime was mercy. The chief lifted his chin, speaking low but carrying. "We go. No blood here today." He gestured, and his men began to mount. Ezekiel swore, fury twisting him. He kicked his horse forward, lunging, rifle raised to strike Clara from his path. In that instant, a shot rang out, sharp, ringing across the valley. Ezekiel's hat flew, his horse reared, and he toppled back, cursing. The settlers froze, rifles half lifted, eyes wide. Clara's hands shook on her rifle, smoke curling from the barrel. She hadn't aimed to kill, only to warn, but the sound split the standoff like lightning through a tree. Ezekiel scrambled to his feet, eyes wild. "You'll pay for this, Clara Thompson. Mark me, you'll pay." He spat in the dust, then wheeled his horse, storming off with his men, trailing, uncertain, muttering. Dust rose in their wake until they vanished down the road. The yard settled into tense quiet. The warriors watched, unreadable. Clara lowered her rifle slow, her breath ragged. Samuel ran to her, clinging tight, his small body trembling. She pressed her cheek to his hair, whispering, "It's over. It's over now." But it wasn't. Not truly. The chief approached, his presence filling the space between them. He studied Clara long, then nodded once. "You are strong." He gestured to the gift still lying at her feet. "Our thanks remains, and our promise." Clara's voice was raw. "I ask no promise, only peace. Peace is not given, it is kept." His gaze flicked toward the road where the settlers had gone. "But if ever you call, we will come." With that he turned, mounting his horse. The warriors wheeled in unison, thundering away across the plain, their colors fading into the horizon until only silence remained. Clara stood in the settling dust, rifle heavy in her hand. Samuel pressed her side. Behind her, Ayoka sank onto the cot again, exhausted but alive. The gifts lay at her feet, tokens of a bond forged in blood and mercy. That night, the cabin was quiet but for the crackle of fire. Samuel slept deep, his face soft in the glow. Ayoka dozed as well, her breathing steadier now. Clara sat alone by the hearth, staring into the flames. Her mind replayed every moment. The cry in the night, the girl's eyes opening, the riders thundering in, Ezekiel's rifle raised, the silence that followed her shot. She felt carved hollow, yet filled with something fierce. She had stood against fear and hate, and though the cost was not yet tallied, she did not regret it. She thought of her husband, of the daughter buried in the small grave behind the barn, of the life that had been carved down to scraps, and now of the girl who lay in her care, alive because she had chosen mercy. For the first time in years, Clara felt the faintest spark of something long buried. Not safety, never that on this land, but strength, the kind that did not come from guns or fences, but from the will to do what was right when the whole world stood against you. She lifted her eyes to the window, where the moon rode high and silver. Beyond the glass stretched the prairie, vast and endless, as full of danger as it was of promise. Somewhere out there rode 30 warriors, bound by gratitude to a widow who had dared to help a child. Somewhere down the road, Ezekiel Porter nursed his hatred, sharpening it for another day. The future bristled with uncertainty, but Clara knew one thing with unshakable clarity. She had chosen, and she would choose the same again. Her voice was a whisper in the quiet. "Kindness is the only weapon I've got, and it'll have to be enough." The flames cracked, sparks leaping, casting her shadow long on the wall. She sat straighter, eyes bright with the fire's reflection, ready for whatever dawn would bring. And perhaps that was the lesson of it all. The frontier was no place for the faint. But even here, mercy could strike like lightning, changing everything in its path. So when history remembered Clara Thompson, it would not be for her land or her losses, but for the night she opened her door to a broken girl and found 30 warriors at sunrise. And maybe if you carry the story with you, you'll remember too that the wild frontier wasn't just built on guns and grit, but on the courage to be kind when kindness was the hardest choice of all. If this tale touched your heart, share it, tell it, pass it along, for stories like these live only as long as they're remembered.